welcome back to another devlog. This is number 29. So, on Monday I sat down with my game designer hat on. I had to go back and think about the overall structure and design of the game. Again, to kind of iron out the details and flesh out the blank spaces in my initial design. I I refined the game design and concept further for another round of feature development. So all this was with the intention to design within my resource constraints. Solo developer. Um, so it was a big idea session. I was conversing with AI from the top to the bottom, um, and taking the initial framework that I had that I used to construct the initial 6 months of features and functionality. So I was highlighting all the good ideas we're having in that conversation and just having a big brainstorm session and, you know, keeping everything on the table. Um, so getting all these good ideas for consideration and bringing into focus kind of the blurry ideas of my initial design and my initial thoughts. So a big wish list of, oh, that would be cool, but knowing I'd probably not have the development resources to do it. So mostly the AI would help, but it sort of felt like it was offering a lot of agreements with my ideas that would work, kind of like a parrot, and be like, "Oh, that's a great idea," instead of offering some genuine criticism like, "Oh, no, that doesn't really work, and here's why." But whatever, we're just brainstorming. There's no bad ideas at this point. Um, so I did a bunch more research on similar games to kind of understand and solidify my understanding of the game design in respect to like the stealth genre, action genre. Kind of going back like I did 6 months ago and looking at all these, gameplay and really kind of breaking it down further and taking inspiration from all these kind of games that like the design of all these certain games that I like to include in my game and saying, would this work in my game or this is a nice to have. Kind of keeping everything on the table. I explored a lot of these game ideas and what I'd like to do, and really kind of boiled it down and broke it down the concepts for analysis. A lot like a flood of information for me to kind of digest and consider. Um, so this whole process was like a precursor to level design. So level design flows from the game design. Game design is kind of like the overarching, but how you design your levels is in consideration of that game design. So if you're building a stealth game, you're gonna have levels that design or facilitate stealth gameplay, right? And for other genres like I don't know, puzzle, your levels will be looking different with purpose, right? So I needed to start. The goal is to start prototyping levels in order to test gameplay, right? I need to test the actual gameplay with levels, so I need to start at the top with game design. Um, so so AI really helped me boil down and kind of we discussed the scope of the game, like the number of levels and themes for each level in relation to kind of like an overarching narrative that would tie the whole thing together. What makes sense, okay, the starting area to the end of the game. What would make sense, so it's narratively cohesive, right? You can't have levels that are like, oh, you're here, then there, and it just, you're just here and there, and it doesn't really make sense to, the progression of where you're going and where the story is leading you. So, um, we even boiled down the final boss concept in an encounter to things, like my initial vision and just really bringing it into focus of, what the gameplay would be like as compared to, instead of just going there and blasting it like a Contra, like how would you design that encounter to have more of a stealth approach and such things like this. So, any question I had, we discussed and really kind of boiled it down and bring everything into focus. We even started coming up with game titles within the context of a discussion that kind of fit, but it's still a work in progress. I wouldn't actually sign off on the game title just yet, but it's actually a first step towards that. This whole process really bolstered my confidence that I could actually build a game that is fun and cohesive, even if it would be a considerable amount of work. If I could build it, there might be a chance it wouldn't flop. There might be a chance where, it could actually be a success. So I started off with the bare bones theme of the game 6 months ago that I started with, but after this session, um, it actually felt that I had some meat on the bones to actually go for another round of feature, to be comfortable with another round of feature development. In the design discussions, it became apparent like I need additional things to include in the game that I haven't implemented yet, and that's an important part, especially for gameplay prototyping. So my vision and excitement for the project were renewed with creativity. I began to see a path to the top of the mountain, even though the journey there is undoubtedly going to be a long one. So we're just throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall, seeing what stick. Doesn't mean it's all going to be in there. It just means, we've kind of thought about what's going to, the roadmap going forward. So at the end of the day, I started analyzing actual level maps of other games in respect to the stealth genre, and really began learning about the next stage down, which is level design for a stealth game. Like why are the maps designed the way they are? I have pretty much zero skill in level design, right? And like any new skill, you have zero knowledge and experience of the why and how. Um, so on Tuesday, with all the research analysis of game design, I turned to start designing the very first starting level, a level that would serve as an in-game tutorial to kind of build up gameplay concepts steadily in like a learning process. But the question was how to actually draft a level design, right? Now, working in Unity, you can start, building a gray box game objects, but that seemed a little bit too time consuming. This is more of a creative process where you need to be quick, right? You can't be held up by Unity like, oh, let me, hold on while I, compile this or something like. So the most obvious is like a pencil and paper, right? You have a blank paper, you're just penciling it out, and you crumple that up and you throw it away, and then you pencil out another one. But that's not modern enough. So I found this program here that you see right here. This is a program called Tiled. Um, and basically what it allows you to do, you can go buy these little asset packs, these tiled packs, and basically allows you to use layers like in Photoshop and basically, paint on the floor, paint little things like the player and the enemies and their, positions, and mark up with text, kind of. And this is much faster where you can actually really construct, flowing from your creativity, you can really construct um, a draft of a level design without being held up by the actual specific details like we're working with Unity, right? You can use this as like a blueprint and then bring it, use it as a reference in Unity and actually start gray boxing this framework out, right? So that's the idea. So, uh, so the level design is a new skill. It's almost like an artistic side. So I had to be, yeah, I had to. It's like a creative process. And as I was going through this and building each section, I'd have to kind of critically think of like, okay, this is where you start. Okay, you're gonna go here. This is what's gonna happen. These guards are gonna do this, and then you're gonna go over here. Then you'll hit this area, blah blah blah, and then you'll go here. And if I ever got like writer's block, I kind of go to AI, like, okay, I'm here, but I'm not sure what I should be doing next. And it would kind of nudge me, like, oh, maybe you can do this, or maybe you can do that. Like, okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna unlock this door, go over here, go through this area, and then there's a key or something. You go this way, and kind of like a branching design, so it's not completely linear. If you go here, so it offers some like choice. You can go to the right, and that kind of gave me like I had to pause and think like the different because if it's not completely linear, like you could go here first or you could go here first, and what are the different cases, like a almost like a program, right? If the user does this, then it behaves this way, or if it goes this way. I had to, as I was designing this, I kind of had to put some thought into the different situations of the different routes that a player can take in order to do this. And that gives them more dynamic, interesting. So basically, you're collecting tools. Okay, you can go here, and then so kind of planning out the flow of where it's going to go, and then kind of keep going with that, and then so it gets to another level, and there's another situation. There's three ways you can go, but this is your end goal, blah blah blah, and just keep rinse and repeat till I kind of have the whole like. I don't know. That's where the gameplay testing comes in. Like, if I build this in Unity and I'm testing out all these things, then I can actually judge. Okay, does it fit the scope of a 1 hour level? Is it when you're actually gameplay testing, does it take an hour, roughly an hour to get through this? Or does it take 2 hours? Or can you breeze through this in like 30 minutes, right? This is what I think would be an hour, but only when you implement it in Unity would you be sure of that. So several levels, lots of different situations, and this is more of like a so I'll just show you like in its entirety, like all the levels overlaid. It seems like a lot. Um, so you can actually, all how many floors. That seems like a good fair amount. It's certainly an hour's worth, right? But all in all, this is a first draft. That doesn't mean like when I build the gameplay, um, I'll see certain things like, oh, that doesn't really work, or I'd like to fine tune this, or I'd like to tweak this, or he should go here in this way, or I wanted to. This serves as a rough construction that I can build, and then in my gameplay testing, I can go back and revise this draft to something else that works better, that's designed better, that really offers a lot of dynamic choice and like branching paths while it's at the same time being linear. It's more like level design is like a puzzle in itself. Like you're um, maybe not like true, supreme design, puzzle box design like Resident Evil, but um, mostly sticking to, um, so it's just not, go from linear point A to B, and that's kind of so it's like there's gonna be a lot of revisions, but it's a good starting point to actually use this and build this concept in Unity. Um, so on Wednesday I had my first level draft. That's great. So I turned back to Unity to start actually building this thing. Uh, but in the process, I actually I actually discovered the concept of camera behavior, right? Um, so this whole thing was like kind of a can of worms I'd never considered before as a gamer. Um, and basically, let me bring up Unity here. What we have here, I'll show this off in a second, but so as I was starting to build this out, um, I was I was thinking about like, okay, when you're moving from room to room, we want the camera to follow along the player. So as a gamer, I always take the camera movement system in all games for granted. When it works and does its job correctly, you don't notice it. You don't pay attention to it. Only when it misbehaves does anyone call it out, right? So, in all the games I've ever played, I've been, top tier games, good games, and it's just not a thing. So, but my camera system would have to move properly from uh, room to room from a top-down perspective, so I can suddenly appreciate the problem, right? So I did lot more research on other games to see, how they handle the camera from a top-down view for different environments. Like I was looking at Metal Gear Solid and things like that, and it's just like okay, so there's actually a couple different concepts. Like, so the concept of in the box, if you imagine this room as a box, your camera would be kind of restricted to the box. Like it can't move past the ceiling and it can't move past the back wall. So what happens when the character moves towards the back wall? It basically one way to handle it is it looks down and keeps its height. That could work. The default behavior for Invector is it actually moves down to focus on the player, but that's a problem because you lose without the height. You actually lose your visibility of your surroundings. Um, that was a so building this. So I was able to um, so other concepts in my research, like so outdoors, there's no ceiling restriction. You're in an open world. You're at a constant height and you can follow along, no problem. But my initial levels, there's going to be a lot of interior levels, so I have to have a camera system that can handle interior environments correctly. Um, so I had to have a height restriction because if you allow it past the height, then you can see through the maze, and that's not what I want. You can actually see above the walls, and that's so I have to have a height restriction. So moving from a higher ceiling into a hallway that's a lower ceiling, having a camera system that can do that. Because if you're still at the same height, you're gonna be able to see through that. So under the ceiling is what I wanted to go for. And having the default behavior. So the real challenge is when these narrow hallways, right? Um, if you there's not a lot of room to work with. So once the hallway narrows and the user is in the back wall, you're gonna be looking at a scene that's like this, right? You're seeing the character really up, and that sort of becomes a third person now. You can't really see, especially with no camera rotation, you can't really see what's in front of you at all, being this low down. So all that said, when I was trying to figure out how to handle this system, I was thinking about, oh, maybe I should just allow, get around these problems, allow the user to actually control the rotation of the camera. Well, that kind of brings in a couple other issues. First, if you that strays away from the initial design. Now, instead of having a fixed forward camera position that tracks left and right, allowing the user to actually rotate the camera, now I have to design my levels so they look good from all angles. So any potential angle, like not just the front wall environmental design, but um, also the back wall and everything you can possibly imagine or view. So I really want to keep that off the table and have a system where it's mostly forward facing and you're moving through. You can move back, but you're not going to be um, you're not going to be really viewing the environmental detail from this angle, and that'll cut down a lot of maintenance and testing work that I have to do as a solo developer. So I have to keep that constraint in mind and figure out a camera system that can handle without allowing the player to do rotation. Plus, it also, you get disoriented if you're allowing. It solves a lot of problems, but you're basically turning into a third person or first person game, and you get disoriented in the maze. You don't know which way's forward or which way you came from as easily. So you have to. I'll probably still include a map, but um, you know, you kind of you can't really figure out which way you're heading at a certain point. The camera is not always pointing north, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. It really needs to be for this situation. Um, the only system that I see it working is if you allow the camera to move through the front wall, so there's an invisible wall. That way you can maintain the ceiling height, and you can actually see without camera rotation. You can actually see, what's down the hall and so forth, um, without being able to see over the maze. So that's a system I'm coming up with. But the problem here is if you allow it past the front wall, you see this void, right? And that's something else. And while this allows you to preserve your top-down height, it also introduces a bunch of other problems we have to construct around. But I still think this is the better way. Like, instead of black void, I do it probably like Diablo, where I construct some arbitrary, like extend the floor and kind of signal that this is a wall you can't move through, maybe with a cutout, but kind of fill this space in with arbitrary environment detail that kind of fades off to black, like a black shadow. So it doesn't feel like it's just a straight cutoff void. That's probably how to handle this. Um, so in order to test this camera system prototype, I I went to tiled and I kind of thought about um, what's a gameplay area that I could actually test all these different scenarios that I was actually planning to build, like front, forward, left, right, smaller rooms, larger rooms, smaller ceilings, larger ceilings. And I came up with this design where it would allow me to move the player around in VR and kind of test, okay, this is the camera in a higher room, the higher ceiling. This is what happens when you go left in a lower ceiling, all the way around. So this is not the actual first level, but this is a prototype level that actually allows me to test all different scenarios that I plan to build in the game, just to make sure the camera works properly. And in testing in VR, I began to formulate a system to kind of identify, okay, if you're moving in here, a bunch of different cases that I need to implement. And the very first case is pretty much, we have a double wall here, but what happens when you're moving through here? Well, the wall needs to kind of fade out and fade back in. Different behaviors like that I'm now fixing, so I can actually have a camera system that works before I actually make my first level. So yeah, I discussed all that. So at the end of the week, I was working on the very first case out of a bunch of cases in order to get this camera system working, and it's pretty much involves having a double wall and adding a shader, dither shader. This sort of works, but I want it to actually fade out the whole wall, not just a circular radius where the camera is. So there's more work for that next week, but you can see this looks much nicer with the lighting and the actual production level materials. It actually looks pretty good in VR. The game's not going to be this dark, but this is actually a good testing thing. Eventually, I'll have these working as regular doors. They open and close when the user approaches them. But that is about all I've done for the week. So a lot of stuff, and it leads me to working more on levels next week. So stay tuned for that, and we'll catch up with you next week to tell you how it's gone. Okay.